Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be talking about another current event, and it is, obviously, Donald Trump's potential indictment. In case you haven't been following it, it's pretty ambiguous. Donald Trump could get indicted very soon, or, like what happened last summer, it could kind of just fizzle out and we'll not really see much come of it. However, I think this does beg an interesting question for my channel, electoral analysis. How would Trump being convicted of a crime formally affect his chances of winning the 2024 election? So in today's video, we'll be diving into that and looking at how I think he'd do compared to my current prediction, which I'll show at the end of the video, and if he's indicted. So let's just get right into it here with our safe Biden states. Again, these are states that I think are going to vote for Biden by more than 10% in this scenario. And I think, we're going to add a few states like New Mexico, which I have voting for him by, but, 9%, I think, in a normal scenario. But I think he'd win it by a bit more if Trump is formally indicted, obviously, which, I won't talk too much about. But what I will say is that I think it's pretty obvious that getting formally indicted wouldn't help Trump. There's very little upside to it. Some people are saying it could charge up his base, but I think that if Trump's on the ballot, they'll come out to vote for him no matter what happens. And obviously being, formally convicted of a crime would only hurt him with moderate suburban voters that he so desperately needs. And so that's why I think Biden would broadly, spoiler alert, do a bit better. Now, that being said, Trump would still have his fair share of states that would vote for him safe, although you'll notice that it will be a bit less than, what you might normally see. So, and we're going to give him, just interestingly enough, we're not going to give him this first district right here. Well, I will put it in the likely column because I don't think it's worth talking about, but I think he wins it by just under 10% in this scenario. Because again, he only won it by, I think, the new one by, I want to say 12 in 2020. And that's pretty doable, especially because it's a pretty left-running seat. It's just like it's suburbs of Omaha as well as the city of Lincoln, which is a pretty left-running area in the state. And it would definitely not flip, but it would be pretty close if Trump does get indicted, if we do kind of have this bad scenario for him. But that said, Trump would obviously do very well in a lot of other states. So he's going to be at 103 electoral votes to Biden's 211, which is, a pretty bad start for him. He's already down over 2-1, and it's going to get worse for him because we're going to give Biden a couple important states here. So the first is going to be Minnesota. We're also going to add on Michigan, New Hampshire, and actually, no, we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to save it for later. But yeah, these three states in the north, the first two being Michigan and Minnesota, which are, these are Midwestern states that Trump was very competitive in 2016. He actually won Michigan in 2016. However, since then has fallen a lot. In 2020, he lost it by 3. Still a fairly respectable showing, though. But, Republicans really just had a rough year there in November in 2022 because they lost the governorship by 10. They lost the state legislature for the first time in 40 years. And Democrats seem to be riding high in Michigan. They've been making gains with working class voters, kind of, turning the clock back in some areas, especially in the Detroit area. And they've been gaining a lot in the suburbs, specifically, both in Detroit, but also in the historically Republican western part of the state, specifically, in places like Kalamazoo, in places like Grand Rapids, and in places, even to an extent, Lansing, which I know is not in the western part of the state, but is trending left, or its suburbs are trending left. New Hampshire is another state that Trump was competitive in 2016 that I think, is definitely an interesting one because it likes to fluctuate a lot, and it does swing, back and forth between elections. Like in 2012, Romney lost it by, I think, 7 or 8, but Trump came within 2,000 votes of winning it just 4 years later. Either way, New Hampshire's a more, moderate state that tends to vote the way the country votes. It's definitely a bit more liberal than the country as a whole, but it's fairly reflective, I'd say. And so the fact that, Trump lost it by 7 in 2020, he'd be indicted if in this scenario, running again. And New Hampshire's just a state that I don't really think there'd be an upside for him to hold on. And I think he'd lose by a bit more than he lost in 2020. Now, for Trump's likely states, we're going to give him Montana, Utah, and Kansas. Montana is only likely because I think of potential John Tester coattails. Him running in the Senate race probably, as of right now, I think he loses by 2 or 3 points, which is pretty good for a Democrat in Montana, obviously, would lift Biden to make this just under a 10-point margin for Trump. And then Utah and Kansas, these are states that did pretty poorly in 2020, trending left, and I think could easily fall under, 10 or 11 points if all goes wrong for Trump, like in this scenario. We're also going to throw Trump the states of South Carolina, Alaska, and Ohio, because, again, these states could easily fall into the mid-single digits, especially a state like Alaska, which elected a Democratic representative in 2022 for the first time since, like, the 70s. So Alaska is going to be interesting long-term, but for now, not really flippable for Biden in 2024. However, what I will say is that in a state like Ohio, we could just like Montana, Democrats obviously have an incumbent senator running for re-election there. Sherrod Brown, I would not say is favored to win. He has a chance of winning. I think maybe a 20 to 30% chance of winning. But as of right now, he's clearly not favored to me. However, I think he loses by under 4, and as a result, makes Biden's loss in Ohio a bit less embarrassing. Because, again, coattails are a big thing in politics, right? Biden lost Ohio by 8 in 2020 without any, Senate Democrats on the ballot. Come 2024, say Brown loses by 3. I think that he'd be able to hold Biden under 10, and or hold Trump's victory under 10, and as a result, see a light red Ohio instead of that, darker feeling like we see in Indiana and Kentucky. South Carolina is just going to be under 10 as a function of raw turnout. Democrats have a decent floor there. They tend to get, low 40s, and in a scenario in which Trump is indicted, which I'm assuming he does worse nationwide, he wins South Carolina by under 10. He only won it by, I think 12 in 2020, so it's not that far of a stretch to say he wins it by, 9 or 10 in 2024 in this scenario. Now, we're going to give Biden's about to win here because we're going to give him a bunch of important states, starting with Arizona and then going up to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. So Arizona and Georgia, I think, are pretty similar. These are states with, large, big, one really big city in kind of the center, being Atlanta and Phoenix, with big suburbs that have been trending towards Democrats. Again, these states were red states even 8 or 10 years ago, but have since become, blue-leaning swing states. And that is, caused by a bunch of things, but the main function, I'd say, is the suburbs of Phoenix and the suburbs of Atlanta. These, again, are areas that are diversifying, which obviously having a more diverse a more diverse electorate is good for Democrats in general. But when you consider the fact that you have white voters, these are wealthy, college-educated white voters switching from being Romney 2012 voters to being Biden 2020 voters, that also helps Democrats just, kind of, kill two birds with one stone, right? Because if a Republican switches to a Democrat, that is a net loss of 2 votes for the Republican, because they're losing a voter and having the voter go to the other side, whereas getting a new voter is only a net loss of 1, right? If that makes, hopefully I explained that well, but because we're seeing both, these areas growing and diversifying with Republicans changing their votes to be Democrats, I don't really see a scenario in which Trump would win either of these states if he's indicted. And I say that because these are moderate voters. They're open to voting Republican down ballot, but they rejected Blake Masters. They rejected Kari Lake. They rejected Herschel Walker. And again, a Donald Trump formally convicted of committing a crime, I cannot imagine would play well with moderate voters. It maybe won't hurt him as much with his base or voters that don't really care in general. But I think with moderate suburban voters who are, more higher propensity, more college educated, that I think would be a big blow for him. Now, going up to the Rust Belt with Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, I think that he would get hurt a bit less in these states. I think he'd still suffer a bit. But specifically in Pennsylvania, Democrats had a really good 2022 there with Fetterman and Shapiro winning by pretty decisive margin statewide. They also won the state house for the first time in a while. And so, I think with a combination, Democrats have forged a new coalition in Pennsylvania. The combination of them doing well in the Philadelphia suburbs while holding on to, some working class voters in areas like Scranton helps them to win pretty consistently statewide. They haven't lost a statewide race in Pennsylvania or a federal race in Pennsylvania since 2016. They did lose the treasurer's race in 2020, but that's not a federal race. I think, barring a surprise, I think Pennsylvania is going to go to Biden in 2024. Wisconsin, I'm a bit more on the fence with this one. I think this is the closest of the 4 states I've been talking about, but it's certainly trending in Biden's direction for now, right? Tony Evers, the Democratic incumbent governor, won re-election despite the fact the Democrats had a pretty poor turnout disadvantage in the state. And when you consider the fact that we're likely to see Democrats I think Biden specifically is going to do very well in the Milwaukee suburbs, which have been trending towards Democrats for a bit. And again, having that Trump indictment really hurts or really helps Biden in the suburbs with moderate voters. So I think that's just enough to give him Wisconsin for a second time, albeit narrowly. And certainly I could see it going for Trump, but I think Biden would be favored. Now, for Trump, we are going to give him one lean state. It's going to be Florida, which I think a lot of you guys might have been surprised to see. Well, hold on. Why isn't that in the likely column? DeSantis won by 20 in November. This should not be competitive. And I agree. I don't really think Biden has any realistic chance of winning it, barring a miracle. But what I will say is that I think Florida's going to be closer than people think, because Republicans had a massive, Democratic turnout in Florida was so bad that if you gave, just say the 2022 elections in Florida with DeSantis versus Chris and Rubio versus Demings were held in 2020, right? Like with that electorate, DeSantis and Rubio would have won by half as much as they won by in 2022, excuse me. And so I'm not going to take away from their persuasion. Again, DeSantis and Rubio did do very well with moderate voters. We know this. However, most of their margin was just turnout. Democrats had horrible turnout in Florida. Republicans had really good turnout in Florida. That's why they won by 20 points. They would have won by half as much as they won by if you gave them turnout levels like what happened in 2020, which is, I think, a better assessment. Because, again, midterms in Florida have historically been pretty bad for Democratic turnout, and 2022 is just that, I think, to the highest possible magnitude. And so this isn't to say Florida is going to go blue anytime soon. It's certainly not. But I think if Trump gets indicted, I think he wins Florida by just under 5. Now, we're going to go to our tilt Biden states. And again, I think there's a few interesting ones you can do here. So the first will be Nevada. Nevada has always been interesting to me because I think it's always very close, but at the same time, there's a lot of different possibilities. I could easily see Trump winning it even if he does get indicted. But at the end of the day, it's a state Biden won in 2020. And while he would do a bit worse in 2024, no matter what, I think he does just well enough in Las Vegas. Because, again, Las Vegas is concerning for Democrats because since 2018, Republicans have kind of been having their margins in Clark County, which is the biggest and most influential county in the state politically. And if that continues in 2024, Democrats have a really hard time winning Nevada in general. So, again, I think in this scenario, Biden holds on to it, but he's in real trouble in Nevada in 2024. That's what I'm going to say. And I think that's, a topic for another time. But I think the fact that he's barely winning in this video just goes to show that it's going to be really interesting to see if he can manage to pull that off in 2024. Now, North Carolina is another one. I've been skeptical of it going blue because I think it was a 2-point margin to victory for Trump in 2020. And while it could narrow up a little bit more, there just aren't enough. The thing with Georgia is that, the vast majority of the districts in the state, congressional districts, because they have even populations, obviously, it's best comparison. The vast majority of those congressional districts are trending towards Democrats. Same in Arizona, right? But in North Carolina, it's more of a mix. There are definitely some blue trending areas in the state, but there are also areas that are just kind of not really moving at all. There's some areas that are even trending red. And so I think North Carolina 2024, I don't think it, I think this scenario would narrowly flip just because Trump would do so badly with voters in the, in the Raleigh and Charlotte suburbs. But don't again, this is not my actual prediction. I think Trump's still favored to win it in 2024 because I'm assuming he does not get indicted. And again, this is just a scenario, right? But Texas is in this scenario would be close, but I think we'll give it to Trump here. He won it by 5.5 in 2020. He'll definitely win it by a bit less in 2024, no matter what. But Biden would need to supercharge Democratic turnout in Houston while also doing better than we think in the suburbs. And I think he's going to do fairly well in the suburbs. I think he'll flip at least one of Denton and Collin County, which are the counties north of Dallas that have been trending towards Democrats for a while now. And I think he's going to do well in San Antonio in those growing areas. But he needs to have a really good turnout from the city of Houston itself, which is questionable, and needs to do even better than we're expecting in the suburbs. And it's possible. It's not completely unlikely. You could draw a scenario with you could draw a map of Texas in which Biden wins it pretty easily, I'd say. But for now, I think even with a Trump indictment, that wouldn't be enough to get what would be necessary for Biden, because Biden again would need to do really well in Houston, and I think that's his biggest Achilles heel in Texas right now, or just for the Texas Democrats in general. Houston's always been a bit of a problem for them because they don't do well enough there, and I think Trump indictment doesn't do anything to help that. It might, it'll hurt Trump in the suburbs, but I don't think it does enough to boost Biden's support in the urban areas where he needs better turnout, and that's why I think Texas would stay with Trump. So again, that would leave us with a pretty decisive Biden victory. And again, Biden, could maybe win Texas, right? I again wouldn't bet on it, but let's say he wins it. Then you get kind of into 2008 type landslide scenario. But again, that's not what I'm predicting is going to happen. So, yeah, Biden decisive victory, and I think the bottom line should be Trump getting indicted wouldn't kill his 2024 chance. He'd still have a path, obviously, but it would hurt him, especially in the suburbs, as I hope I made clear in this video. So this is my current prediction. Again, I think Biden wins, but it's narrower. And as you can see, he would not win Nevada, North Carolina. He'd also do worse across states like Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Florida, Wisconsin. And so that's, I think, where we're at right now. It's a close election. I'd say Biden's the favorite, but it's closer than people think. And I think a Trump indictment would really be bad for Trump because it would kind of, it would lower his chances by an amount big enough to really put Biden in a really, I guess I want to say, really a position where he could be a lot more conservative. Because I think for now Biden has to like really, really run to try to beat Trump, and I think he will ultimately, but I think he's gonna really have to try to work for it and get good persuasion. I think if Trump gets indicted, that does a lot of the work for Biden. So, yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please follow my Instagram at RyanJakubowski_3. Read my writing at ryanjakubowski.substack.com. And that is all for today. I'll see you all in the next video.